Hello friends, welcome to the M.A.R.E. podcast. Before we get started, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Don't forget that you can find more about the M.A.R.E. project at www.marehamburg.com, and you can support the project and this podcast through Patreon. All the links are in the description. Enjoy! Hello friends, welcome to another episode of the M.A.R.E. podcast brought to you by the M.A.R.E. Foundation. It's a very sunny day here in Oxford today, and I'm very happy to be welcoming Gabby to the podcast today. Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So you were involved, the way I found out about you is that you were involved in the publication of the M.A.R.E. Online lecture series proceedings with M.A.R.E. Publishing, because you work at M.A.R.E. Publishing now, as you'll tell us in a bit. But that's how I found out about you. And then I stalked you out a bit, and Maurice told me, oh, she actually did a master's in Maritime Archaeology. I was like, what? Where? And then I realized you did your master's at Oxford as well. I was like, wait, that's a homie. It's great. So welcome again to the podcast. It's great to have you here. So do you want to introduce yourself a bit? Tell us a bit about you,
Yes.
where you're from, where you studied and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, my name is Gabby. I'm originally from Canada. I grew up in Calgary, and then I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Toronto, and I did that in a double major in archaeology and classical civilizations with a minor in anthropology. So very like classic combination there. And then I came over to do my master's at Oxford, as you said, and I did that in Maritime Archaeology. And then I decided to take some time out of academia and join the workforce. And I've been at M.A.R.E. Publishing now for a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Excellent. All right, let's start then from the beginning. Why archaeology? What made you go into archaeology and classical civilizations, did you say?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So that's just a nice little degree that Toronto offers where you can do, classical archaeology and avoid the languages. So I didn't do any Latin or ancient Greek, thankfully, but was still able to study classical archaeology. I've always wanted to be, well, maybe not always. I started out wanting to be a paleontologist when I was a kid. But there's a lot of paleontology in Alberta, which is the province that I'm originally from. And I knew that I wanted to travel. So little me, when I was like maybe 10 years old, thought, okay, I want to be a paleontologist, but the best paleontology in Canada is in my province. I don't really want to stay here. So what's the next best thing? I guess I'll do archaeology. And my parents both actually wanted to be archaeologists when they were growing up and ended up going into geology. So it's kind of like in my genes, I guess, to want to be an archaeologist.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I knew that I wanted to be an archaeologist since I was a kid. And when I was about 12 years old, I told my parents, one day I'm going to go to Oxford, because I had Googled what's the best school in the world for archaeology. And obviously Oxford had come up. And I told my parents, one day I'm going to go to Oxford and I'm going to study archaeology. And they said, okay, that's great. Just not for your bachelor's, because we can't afford that.
Fair point.
So I ended up going to Toronto instead, which was really lovely. And when I was there, I really fell in love with ancient Greek archaeology, but specifically the Minoans. So for anyone listening who doesn't know what the Minoans are, it's the Bronze Age civilization on Crete. So if you know like the story of the Minotaur, the labyrinth, that's all the Minoans. If you've ever been to Knossos on Crete, that's the most well-known Minoan site. Yeah, so I really fell in love with the Minoans, and that's actually kind of how I ended up into maritime archaeology, which I think is quite different than a lot of people. I wouldn't say I'm like a very typical maritime archaeologist, because I actually have, and I can't believe I'm admitting this to the whole wide world, but I have a very big fear of deep water. So the whole like scuba diving, shipwreck thing wasn't really for me. But I was like, okay, I'm really interested in this civilization that obviously lives on an island and would have had a lot to do with the water and with, boats, basically. So it might be a really interesting way to study the Minoans through maritime archaeology. And that way also, I was also thinking, if I stay in North America and continue into classical archaeology, I'm going to have to learn Latin. I'm going to have to learn ancient Greek. So maybe I'll just go into maritime archaeology, where I can still study the same like culture, but without the languages.
Oh yeah.
So that's
Oh yeah.
how I ended up here, which is I think is a bit different than most maritime archaeologists.
Yeah, I mean, okay, first of all, there is a joke there about paleontologists and archaeologists and dinosaurs and all that. I can't
Yes.
think of it right now, but there is the joke there. So do with that information as you please. But okay, so now what you did to me right now is that I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And what is that is, how do we, there is this elitism in maritime archaeology.
Hmm.
Let me phrase it that way. That people will be very quick to label themselves as diving maritime archaeologists or non-diving maritime
Yes.
archaeologists. And we'll be very quick to, and I've been thinking about this a lot, because you know how when maritime archaeology started, it was all, antiquarians, treasure hunting, shipwrecks,
Hmm.
adrenaline, masculinity, men, and all that. And that wasn't really maritime archaeology. That was something else. And when maritime archaeology happened, and this broad kind of definition of past humans and their relationship with, I don't know, bodies of water, I guess, that kind of, shipwrecks are a part of it,
Yes.
but a very small part of it, I would say, because think of the maritime landscape. Think of how many things are happening. And I mean, shipwrecks are a tiny, tiny, tiny part of one aspect of the maritime landscape.
Hmm. That
So
is
I
very
don't know.
true.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is some place in maritime archaeology to talk about, I don't know, moving past this I don't know, racism towards people who don't dive and don't swim, and because I don't think it's at all necessary to dive to be a maritime archaeologist.
I mean, I
But
definitely agree with you, but I do think like the diving is very flashy and non-archaeologists especially love to hear about that part of it. And it is really interesting, like underwater excavations. But you are very right that there is a much broader group of
yeah,
people that would consider themselves maritime archaeologists who don't dive.
yeah, because and what do we define maritime archaeology? Is something that it's submerged in 1 meter of water maritime archaeology? I mean, on one side, yes, but on the other side, what's the thing that makes, I don't know, the settlement maritime? Is it the
Mhm.
fact that it's underwater, or is there something in there that it's so anyway, I'm not gonna get to it because I'm gonna talk forever. Anyway, you thought very, very nicely, you thought you wanted to see the Minoans through this maritime lenses, and you said, let's go to Oxford and do maritime archaeology at Oxford. So how was maritime archaeology at Oxford?
Oh, it was such a dream. Like I said, I always, had this dream of coming to Oxford. So being here, I mean, it was indescribable. I'm sure you know. It's just such a really special place, and
Mm.
I was studying under Damien Robinson, who is just a really, yeah, fantastic maritime archaeologist. And I had read about his site, Taunus Heraclean, in I think like an archaeology magazine when I was a teenager. And I just remember like looking at the pictures of the underwater statues and all the stuff they had found and just being like completely enamored with it. So I thought it was just the coolest thing to study under him. And
Mm.
yeah, it was just such a great experience. I mean, the academics here are just completely unmatched, and the social life here also very fun. So I had a really, really, really good time here. But it was also like the most work I've ever done in my life. It was very hard. Especially
Absolutely.
the master's is 11 months, and that's, you do classes, you do a dissertation, all crammed into 11 months. So it's very like it passed in a blink of an eye.
Mm. It's intense. Let's just say.
Very intense,
Fair enough.
yeah.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Anyway, so you decided to do your thesis then on the Minoans, right?
Yes. Yes.
So how did that? What about the Minoans? Is it because I imagine it's not general the Minoans in the sea. I I,
Yeah.
I suspect someone else has wrote that before, maybe.
Yes, I mean, lots of people have looked at the Bronze Age Aegean, and looking at seafaring and trade and all of that. But what's interesting with the Minoans is that we obviously know that they must have had a lot of boats and were a seafaring people. They were on this island and they had a lot of contact with the Cyclades and with the southern mainland. So they were getting around on the water, but we don't have any, well, there is arguably evidence of one Minoan shipwreck off of the island. I believe it's called Sarah. Very sorry for my pronunciation for anyone that knows better than me. But other than that, and that's just an assemblage of pots that are kind of in the shape of a hull that they think might have been a shipwreck. cargo of a shipwreck. But other than that, there's no preserved boats from the Minoan civilization. Instead, what we have is depictions of Minoan ships in art or figural representations. There is debate on whether we could call it art or not. So the main representations we have are on these things called seal stones. So the Minoans had these tiny little gems that we think were worn either as like a necklace or a bracelet because they have a hole through them. And these little gems would have been carved with different designs. And they would have been impressed into clay. And it kind of acted in the same way that like a signet ring would work. You know, you impress your signet ring into wax and that creates a seal. So it was used to seal things, a kind of way of authenticating products or documents. So we have thousands of these seals all over Crete. And they were just very, very prevalent. And they depict all sorts of things. So there's a lot of different like abstract motifs. There's animal motifs. Some have humans on them, but there's a lot that have ships on them as well. And so people thought, okay, we have a bunch of depictions of ships on these stones. Surely we can study them and then we'll magically know what the Minoan ships look like. But they didn't. Well, the issue with that is that the stones are only a couple centimeters long, so they're quite small, like very, very, very small objects. And the ships on the objects are very basic representations of ships, like kind of in the same way, you know, a kid would draw a sailboat. So there isn't actually much that we can tell off of these designs about what ships may have really looked like. And I did go into the dissertation, you know, I think a lot of master's students have really big egos and think, you know what, I'm going to solve this huge problem that, you know, all these people before me, all these great academics weren't able to solve. So I'm going to be the one who looks at these seal stones and I'm going to be able to tell what Minoan ships look like. So that's what I went into the project thinking. Obviously not where it went. So I instead ended up basically talking about how there's absolutely no way that we can tell what boats actually look like from these depictions. And what I instead talked about is, so some of the earlier seal stones, the ships on there are known to come from one of the earliest forms of writing on the island, which is called Cretan hieroglyphic. And it has been accepted that that's what those stones represent. They're not actually representations of ships themselves, but representation of a symbol from Cretan hieroglyphic that is in the shape of a ship. But then later on, you get these stones that are called the talismanic stones. And I believe, sorry if I'm wrong on this, people out there, but I believe that name comes from the fact that they thought that they had kind of like amuletic powers, that these were like more magical stones. And then there's different drilling techniques that were used to create these talismanic stones. And these, again, come in a variety of different motifs. But there's a bunch of them which show half of a ship. It's under debate if it's the bow or the stern. Sorry, the prow or the stern. But it basically shows one end of the ship with this superstructure on it. Kind of looks like a cabin. Some people say it looks like bundled goods. They are very different, the different representations on the stones, like one stone from another. You can tell that they kind of represent the same thing, but the thing that's on top of the hull changes between the different stones. And so I was looking at these and I was thinking, you know what, this looks really, really, really similar to a symbol that is found in a later script called Linear A. And that hadn't really been talked about before, especially because people had found the ship procession fresco at Akrotiri. And on that fresco, there is a bunch of ships that have a cabin on them in this procession. So immediately people had thought, okay, well, these talismanic stones must represent the same thing that's shown in the fresco. But instead, in my thesis, I argued that no, it doesn't actually represent those ships as we see in the fresco, but it actually represents this sign in Linear A. I should also mention that the sign is only depicts half of the ship, and it has kind of like these boxes stacked on each other, which just looks like an abstract version of what's shown on the seals. And so I basically just argued that it's a continuation of the earlier tradition of putting script signs onto these seals, which does make sense because the seals were largely used for administrative purposes. So yeah, I just went into away from trying to figure out what ancient ships look like and about the script. But of course, I was only a master's student, so it was beyond me to go more in depth about the different scripts, and linear A is undeciphered, so it's harder to say anything more than that.
Yeah, let me just say that we started this episode with you saying, oh, thankfully I found this program in Toronto where I would avoid ancient Greek and Latin. And here you are talking to me about Minoan hieroglyphics and linear
Yes.
A. So, I don't know.
Yes, but I still to this day haven't studied Latin, and that's all I cared about.
A win is a win. We take the win.
That is definitely a win for me.
Wow. Oh, that's super, super interesting. Of course, while you were explaining, I thought about a book that I've read recently, a very old book by Carl Jung, the psychologist, that many say he was like the person who came after Freud, that he wrote a book called The Man and His Symbols. And he started on the introduction, he said, we humans, we live in a world of symbols and we constantly create more symbols and produce more symbols. And even if we don't, we fall asleep and our brain creates symbols that we say are dreams. So this what you explain, this continuation of symbols, and I don't see why it can't be both. It can remind them of something realistic, but it can also remind them of the ancient. That's the point of a symbol, that it changes meaning, and it's there for the people who see it to interpret it. But I'm also very interested to know, like I've seen some of these seal stones, right? And they're tiny, 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 tiny. Like how did they, for someone who is not familiar with them, how did they function in like everyday? How could they see what it was when they are so tiny? Where would they seal imprint?
We have a lot of sealings, so that's the clay that was impressed with these designs that have been preserved in the administrative centers, and they were actually preserved accidentally. So the clay was baked in these fires at the different administrative palaces, which has allowed them to be preserved, which is really great for us. Obviously, the fire not so great for the Minoans, but it left us with these clay ceilings. And it's a lot easier to see the designs when they're impressed into clay rather than just looking at the tiny little stones, which is, of course, how they were meant to be viewed, is on the ceilings and how they were meant to be understood in that culture. So it's definitely worth looking at the ceilings they made, because it's really cool, and you can see a lot more of the detail and the artistry that went into making these seals when you see the actual ceilings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so impressive, right? Making something, making something that we today are debating if it represents a real ship, and it's actually so tiny, then you manage to kind of draw it in a way or carve it in there to resemble a ship. I think that's super impressive. I don't know how they did.
A lot of them have a lot of detail. There's like the ones with little animals and people in the scenes, like they are truly, truly tiny. And the artists were just absolutely fantastic to be able to create that. They used like little drills, and they were able to drill these little scenes into tiny stones. It is incredible.
Yeah, because we appreciate, I think we really appreciate their work only when we put it under an X-ray, or we create some kind of grayscale representation of it to see all the details. And that's when we realize, oh my God, there's so many details. And there's some of them, maybe not from Crete, some from Crete will show people, hunting and stuff. And you can see all their muscles, tense when they hunt the animals. And I'm like, what? Wow, that's what? Anyway.
It is really incredible.
Yeah, but you can see where this, where what we call Greek art in sculptures later, or in pots, started, right? You can see that it was there, the foundations were there, it started there, and then it kind of like went got different forms, but it was always very realistic and very, very high quality. So yeah, I think that's fantastic.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you want to do with your thesis? You want to did you publish it? Is it published?
No, it is not published. I've been thinking about trying to make it into an article, but I think a lot of other students out there can relate when I say you just never have the time.
Yeah.
I finished when I finished my master's, I did the thing where I was like, okay, I never ever want to look at that ever again in my life. I just spent the last 3, 4 months working every waking hour of the day on this. I would be very happy to never see it again.
Hmm.
And then I keep just saying, okay, I need to turn this into an article. I need to try to get it published. But, I have all these other things to do. I now have a full-time job. And it's kind of the last thing you want to do when you come home from a long day at work is sit down and revise your master's thesis. So, I mean, hopefully one day it'll see the light of day. But
Absolutely. Oh, I
yeah.
hope. So let's talk about the work then. You, after you finish your master, not directly after, a year later, was it?
Yeah, I took 8 months off, I believe. I actually ended up moving back to Toronto and thought, okay, I'm gonna go get a museum job or something.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not much in the way of museum jobs in Canada. There's a lot less museums there than there is in the UK, obviously. And yeah, archaeology jobs are very scarce there. So I ended up moving back for 8 months, but didn't really find a job. So I moved back to the UK.
And how did the bar job came along? Did you find it through what means?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird story. So they had a posting for an assistant editor job that
Mm.
I went for, and unfortunately didn't get that position. And then I interviewed again with them for a customer service position and didn't get that one. But they were like, you know what, we really like you. Like, we've had you for 2 interviews now. Let's try to make something work. And I had done a lot of work before in social media management. They were really looking for someone to work on their social media. So they first hired me as a part-time social media manager and kind of just created this role for me, which was really great and very thankful to them for that. And it just kind of grew. Maybe 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, they were like, okay, why don't we turn this into something more full time? And it's turned into this kind of hybrid marketing assistant, admin-y, just kind of whatever needs to be done kind of job,
Mm.
which was kind of built for me, which is really nice. Yeah, very, like,
Wow.
special situation.
Oh yeah, it is a very special situation. I don't think I've ever heard making like creating a job for
Yeah.
someone who they don't know but they've met through an interview. You must have made an impression then. If they just decided to create a job just for you. That's impressive. So
Yeah, I was very lucky.
are you involved then in what process are you involved in every process kind of? And like everything that happens.
No, well, I dip my fingers a lot into other people's work when they need help, but I'm mostly at the end. Once the book has been published, I do pretty much all of the marketing. So
Mm.
I run all of the social media. I do any flyers and posters that need to be made. I work directly with the authors about how they can market their books. I reach out to a lot of different like institutions and academics that might be interested in the work and just try to get the word out there about the book. So
Wow.
mostly involved in the last stages of well, not the last stages of the book's life because obviously the book continues to live on, but the last kind of stages of when it's really with us.
A very, very important part of it, because what's the point of printing a book if no one's going to read it,
Yes,
right?
absolutely, and it is always so nice to work with the authors at that point because, A, I think they're very relieved that the project is finally done and their book is out there, and it's just so nice to see how excited they get about their book. I love working with the authors.
Wow, that's very interesting to hear. So, how many Bar publishes a lot, right? They
Yes.
is it like a book every once in a while? Like, okay, a new book from Bar.
Yeah, yeah, there is a couple every month. Yes. So hopefully I don't get this wrong and my boss hears it, but we publish, I believe, around 60 to 70 books a year, which is quite a lot,
Wow,
especially because we're a team of about 8 or 9 people. So it's a really small team. But yeah, lots of books.
wow. Wait, how is that viable though? How does it financially make sense to just publish?
Yeah, so we also sell our digital collection, which is so B.R. Publishing's been around since the 70s. Again, I'm sorry to my boss if she's listening to that and I got that wrong. But it was started by Anthony Hans, who was actually an Oxford chemist. The story is very interesting. He was a professor at Oxford in chemistry, and him and his friends excavated a Roman villa somewhere near, I believe, in Oxfordshire. And no one wanted to publish their excavation reports because, I guess, because they weren't archaeologists, because they were all chemists. um, and so, yeah, they couldn't find anyone to publish their excavation reports. So, of course, they did what anyone else would do, which is start their own archaeology publishing company. And it kind of grew out of that. So, right now, we have over 4,000 titles because we have been publishing since the 70s. So, all of those titles have been digitized and are now sold as like a digital collection to institutions. So,
Okay.
that is, yeah, the main like product
Yeah.
that allows us to keep publishing like that is this
Yeah.
large collection of digital books.
It makes sense.
Mm.
And I guess the publications I see coming out from BAR, it's they are the you don't see like you see like the big fancy excavations, but you also see the work of people who are not necessarily have a £2 million fund to start with.
Mhm.
And I think that's what's interesting about it. You can find a bit of everything. And it's
Yes.
not just, oh yeah, I'll only publish this 5 professors who are at the top of the mountain and their work will be read. And I think there are in BAR, there are some of those kinds of books,
Mhm.
but also everyone that's below them. And I think that what makes it like, nice and interesting and reachable, I guess, for early career researchers that are interested in publishing.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, BR is such a wonderful place for early career researchers because A, we publish for free. And I mean, of course, that's exclusive of open access fees, some little add-ons, that kind of stuff. But if you're just doing, your very standard publication, we can publish completely free of charge to the author, which for those that don't know, that is quite rare in the publishing industry. So it is very accessible to early career researchers in that way. And yeah, I mean, everyone that works there is just so friendly and so willing to help early career researchers, PhD students, just really, really great people who want to help authors
Nice.
get their first books out there, but also have the means of publishing, like you said, these like higher academics. So it is like a broad range of people that we publish, which brings in just like a very diverse range of subjects, of time periods, just absolutely everything, which is it's really cool for me to be able to see all of that stuff come through it. I've learned a lot about so many different kinds of archaeology that I'd never thought of before. So it is very cool.
Nice, very nice. Well, I'd love to just keep on talking about publishing because I think that's a topic that interests everyone. But
Yes.
I'm not. I'm going to stop for now. I'm sure that everyone who's listening, who's maybe interested, can get in touch with you or BR generally and ask any questions, or get in touch with me, and I'll get you in contact with. But anyway, they'll find a way.
Yep.
So I wanted to ask a bit about you. So do you where do you see yourself in the future? Do you want to keep on doing work in the publishing world, or do you see yourself pursuing a PhD maybe, or doing something else?
Yeah, a bit of a tricky question. I have always, always, always wanted to do a PhD, and I think in the future I will do one. But I'm sure, as you and all of the listeners know, funding in archaeology right now is non-existent. So I am taking a few years off I needed a few years off after my master's just because it was so intense, and I had gone straight from a 4-year undergrad degree straight into the master's. So I thought, I've been in school my entire life. Let me go work a little bit, see what else is out there, make sure that I do really want to continue into academia. Um, and yes, that's kind of where I am now, is just in that kind of transitional phase where I do think eventually I will go back and do a PhD. But for now, it's kind of getting myself in a place financially where I can be able to do a PhD, and also mentally where I just feel, ready to be back
Yeah.
into the academic world. I mean, doing a PhD is no easy thing, as I'm sure you're aware. Uh,
Oh yeah. Oh my God.
yeah.
I think both aspects are important, both the financial/funding aspect, but maybe you can't do much about that. But the other thing, the mental preparedness to do a PhD, I think it's very important, because I think if you're ready to spend like 3 to 4 years constantly being put down, constantly being reminded that I don't know, maybe you're not doing enough, or you're not, you need to work more, or for 3 and 4 years you get no validation about your work, basically, and you just you yourself and your research, and no one really knows what you're doing. Only you know what you're doing. So if you're mentally prepared for all that, and you're ready to go through it, I think that's as important as is being able to find a way to fund your studies.
Yes, yeah, and I've been told by a lot of people that they think between your master's and your PhD is the best time to take some time out, because it is always just so easy to go back in for a PhD, and that the people that they know that have done what I'm doing now come back and are just a lot better suited to handling the PhD. You know, I work a 9 to 5, so I know how to have this like work-life balance that I can now bring into my PhD. And yeah, I'm just hoping that I'm in a better place to to get back into it when I do decide to go back.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you have all the time in the world. You can do it
Yes.
whenever you want. There's no one rushing you to do it right now.
And actually, what's
Yeah.
something I've also seen at BAR is that we have some of our authors coming out and publishing, you know, their PhD theses, and they started their PhD at 50 or 60 or whatever. And it really shows you that it's absolutely never too late to go back to school, which is really lovely to see. You know, it's especially with something like archaeology that isn't always the best choice financially,
Oh,
career
yes.
wise, that you can always go back to it. But when
Oh,
you're
yeah.
able to, basically.
Absolutely. I think that's the best time, actually, to do a PhD. Like, if I wasn't doing a PhD, I would be like, you know what? Once I retire and I'm,
Yes.
65 and I have nothing else to do, why not? Why not do a PhD?
Yeah,
Like, I wouldn't
exactly.
stress about it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it like, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna stress over it like my life depends on it, because my life is behind me now. Now I can do whatever I want. So I think that's the best time to do a PhD. And so yeah. So make sure you're ready when you do.
Yes.
But anyway, I want to thank you again so much for being in the podcast. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for chatting with us. And thank you for all the work you're doing at the BAR. I'm sure lots and lots of archaeologists and early career researchers appreciate the work you're doing over there. So, do you have any closing remarks before we close the episode?
Oh, it was just really lovely to speak with you. I hope that, you know, I've inspired someone out there maybe to go into publishing or to see that there is light outside of academia. And to everyone that's listening, yes, the one thing I want to say, publishing is very daunting and very scary when you start out. But all I can say is to just reach out to the publishers. Everyone is so, so, so friendly, so kind, and everyone just wants to make sure that your project gets to where it needs to be. And yeah, just don't be afraid to reach out.
Don't be afraid to reach out. Nice, nice one. Thank you so much. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of the M.A.R.E. podcast. And I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Bye.